Ethan Cole had spent most of his adult life proving that quiet men could still build loud empires. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice in meetings, never flashed a watch heavy enough to announce his income, and never corrected people when they assumed he was merely another careful executive in a decent suit rather than the majority owner of one of the fastest-growing regional shipping and cold chain distribution companies on the East Coast. He had money, real money, the kind that sat inside layered holding companies, commercial properties, secured bonds, silent partnerships, and international accounts that only his attorneys and wealth managers fully understood. But to look at him, no one would have guessed. He drove sensible cars, wore dark jackets without logos, and lived in an elegant brownstone in Boston that his wife, Vanessa, often complained was too tasteful to be fun. Ethan had married her because she was beautiful, yes, but more than that, because she had once seemed alive in a way that cut through his orderly world. She had laughed loudly in places meant for whispering, taken his hand in public, and made him feel, for a brief, dangerous season, like maybe being careful all the time was not the same thing as being alive. For 3 years he gave her everything he thought a husband should give: loyalty, patience, comfort, respect, room to dream, room to spend, room to become. He paid off her student loans without mentioning it twice. He funded the boutique project she lost interest in 6 months later. He listened when she said she hated feeling small around powerful people, and he made sure she never had to attend a business dinner she didn't want to attend. He loved her in the practical language he understood best: protection, consistency, and trust. The tragedy was not that she failed to appreciate it. The tragedy was that she studied it and mistook it for weakness. The beginning of the end came on a wet Thursday in late October when Ethan's final meeting of the day was canceled after a board member's private flight was grounded. His assistant asked whether he wanted the evening rescheduled, but he surprised himself by saying no. He told the driver to take the night off and drove home alone through a cold drizzle, thinking vaguely that maybe Vanessa would be happy to see him early for once. He even stopped at a small bakery she liked and picked up a lemon tart she always claimed tasted like the one her grandmother used to make. That detail would stay with him later in an almost comical way: how he had walked into the collapse of his marriage carrying dessert in a white paper box. The house was dim when he entered, softer than usual, the music low, the air scented with the expensive candle Vanessa only lit when she expected company. Ethan called out her name once, lightly, and when no answer came he moved farther in, loosening his tie. Then he heard laughter. Not the bright public laugh she used for dinners. Not the distracted laugh she gave him when she was scrolling on her phone. A private laugh, intimate and sharp. He stopped in the hallway just outside the sitting room when he heard a man's voice answer her. For one frozen second, he did not understand what his own ears were telling him. Then her voice came again, lazy and amused, and every part of him went cold. "He still has no idea," Vanessa said. "I swear." Ethan would apologize to a thief for making the robbery awkward. The man laughed. Ethan knew that laugh. Dylan Mercer, Vanessa's former boyfriend. The ex she had once dismissed as a mistake from my 20s. Ethan had met him exactly twice. Once at a gallery event, once at a charity auction. Both times Dylan had acted overly familiar, the way men do when they want to pretend history makes them important. Ethan stood completely still, one hand tightening around the pastry box as Vanessa continued. "You should have seen the way he talked to his attorneys last month. He's restructuring again. More assets, more properties, more equity. He acts like I don't notice. He thinks because I don't sit in those meetings, I don't know what's happening." Dylan asked, "So what's the number now, really?" Vanessa gave a little scoffing sound. "Enough that even half would set us up for life. The company is worth a fortune. The waterfront warehouse in Providence alone has appreciated like crazy, and he has that distribution hub in Jersey. And don't forget the investment account his mother left him. He hides things under those boring lawyer words, but I've paid attention. Once I file, he'll be too embarrassed to fight. Men like Ethan always want to look civilized." Dylan said, "And then what?" Vanessa answered with the kind of calm certainty that destroys illusions in a single stroke. "Then I walk away with my share. You and I disappear somewhere warm, and he can keep his spreadsheets." There was more. Ethan would remember all of it. Dylan saying, "So you're really done pretending?" Vanessa replying, I was done the minute I realized he'd always choose being respectable over being dangerous. Dylan asking whether there was any chance Ethan would discover them first, and Vanessa, with a laugh that would haunt him far longer than the words themselves, saying, "Let him. He still wouldn't know how to hurt us." Ethan did not step into the room. He did not shout. He did not demand explanations, or throw the tart or smash glasses, or ask the ancient humiliating question of betrayed people everywhere, which is why. He already knew why. Because he was useful. Because he was decent. Because she had confused mercy with helplessness. He set the pastry box silently on the hallway table, turned, opened the front door as carefully as he had entered, and stepped back into the rain without making a sound. He drove for nearly an hour with no destination, parked under a dark overpass, and sat staring through a windshield furred with rain while the inside of his life rearranged itself around a new truth. The pain was real, sudden, and deep, but underneath it there was something else, something older and steadier than emotion. Discipline. Ethan had not built his fortune by reacting. He had built it by seeing the board clearly while others were still admiring the pieces. By the time dawn broke over the harbor, he had a plan. For the next 4 days, Ethan played the role Vanessa expected with flawless precision. He came home at normal hours. He kissed her cheek. He answered her casual questions with casual answers. He even apologized for being buried in work when she performed mild irritation over his schedule. Inside, however, an invisible evacuation was underway. Ethan met with his personal attorney, Martin Hale, at a private office not associated with the company. He met with a forensic accountant. He initiated accelerated sales on several personal holdings that were titled in his sole name. He moved liquid reserves into international accounts long ago. Prepared for currency diversification and risk shielding. He terminated authorized user access on every card Vanessa used under the justification of fraud prevention review. He transferred vehicles, collectibles, and several investment instruments into a trust structure insulated by prenuptial provisions Vanessa had once mocked as a formality for paranoid rich people. The thing about Ethan was that he had loved sincerely, but he had never been careless. Vanessa knew enough to smell wealth. She had never cared enough to understand its architecture. By Monday morning, the architecture had shifted. The boutique line of credit she used for shopping declined. The black card attached to Ethan's private banking account stopped working during lunch. The app tied to one of their household accounts displayed a frozen balance and a notice that the relationship manager had changed. Vanessa called Ethan 3 times. He did not answer. She texted at the store. Card got declined. Weird issue. Then, are you in a meeting? Then, Ethan, call me now. He was already gone. He left no handwritten note, because notes can be used as emotional footholds. He left no dramatic evidence, because drama feeds people like Vanessa. What he did leave was absence, so complete it became its own message. By the time she filed for divorce 2 weeks later in a burst of outrage and wounded entitlement, she found that the lifestyle she had assumed was a permanent landscape had become a mirage. The jointly visible balances were minimal. The house she thought of as theirs was held through a structure protected by premarital capital and business collateralization. The jewelry she believed was an investment was mostly insured retail, not legacy wealth. The value she imagined herself entitled to had moved beyond her reach before she ever stepped into a lawyer's office. Her fury became disbelief. Her disbelief became panic. Ethan, meanwhile, drove south and then east until polished highways gave way to narrower coastal roads lined with bait shops, weathered diners, and marinas crowded with working boats rather than pleasure yachts. He slept the first night in his SUV overlooking black water and a row of dock lights trembling in the wind. On the 3rd day, he reached a North Carolina fishing town called Breakers Point, a place that smelled like brine, engine grease, cedar, and old storms. It was not picturesque in the glossy tourist sense. It was real. Wind-scoured paint, gulls fighting. Over scraps, men with rope-burned hands, women balancing invoices, and ice deliveries and family arguments in the same breath. It was the kind of town that had learned long ago not to care about your past if you could show up on time. Ethan parked near a weather-beaten seafood restaurant called Maris House, a family-run place with blue trim, a hand-painted sign, and the kind of old porch that leaned slightly toward the sea as if listening. The restaurant sat beside a small dock operation where the family processed local catch for a handful of independent boats. It should have been charming. Instead, it looked tired, like something beautiful that had spent too long fighting to stay upright. Ethan went inside near closing. A broad-shouldered man in his 60s stood behind the register going over invoices with a pencil and a frown. A woman with silver threaded through dark hair was wiping down counters. And at the far end of the open kitchen, issuing instructions with a voice so sharp it could cut through frying oil, was a young woman in rolled sleeves and work boots whose expression said she trusted nobody and had no time to pretend otherwise. This was the Dawson family: Frank Dawson, owner, his wife, Maria, and their daughter, Riley. Frank looked up when Ethan approached. "Kitchen's closing," he said. Ethan nodded. "I'm not here to eat. I'm looking for work." Frank gave him a long look that took in the travel dust, the expensive posture poorly disguised in cheap clothes, and the exhaustion behind his eyes. "You ever hauled fish, unloaded ice, scrubbed grease traps, fixed freezer seals, mopped decks at 4:30 in the morning?" Ethan said, "No, but I can learn." Riley snorted from the kitchen. Translation: "No." Frank ignored her. "Why here?" Ethan answered with the truth, pared down to something usable. "Because I need a place where nobody cares who I was yesterday." Maria's gaze softened first. Frank's took longer. Riley stepped closer, crossing her arms. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fragility: sun-browned skin, intelligent eyes, hair tied back carelessly, a face made more striking by impatience than polish. "We're not a rescue shelter," she said. "Then don't rescue me," Ethan replied. "Let me earn a cot and a meal." She looked as if she wanted to dismiss him on principle. Frank, however, said, "We need help at the dock more than in the kitchen. You can sleep in the old prep room upstairs if you don't mind noise from the ice machine. Show up at 5. If you disappear after a day, don't bother saying goodbye." Ethan nodded once. "Thank you," Riley muttered. "Dad, seriously?" Frank only said, "Everyone gets one chance." Ethan's first week nearly broke him. He was strong enough in the general sense of being healthy and disciplined, but there is a difference between gym strength and labor strength, between choosing effort and depending on it for shelter. He carried crates packed with shrimp and snapper until his shoulders burned. He scrubbed scales from surfaces that seemed magnetized to filth. He learned how to stack coolers so the load settled right, how to hose salt without wasting water pressure, how to patch frayed rope, how to check compressor lines, how to keep his mouth shut when experienced people were moving fast. He rose before dawn to the sound of engines and gulls, and went to sleep smelling like sea spray and bleach. Riley watched him the way people in hard places watch outsiders, waiting for the complaint, the excuse, the reveal. None came. Ethan did not flirt, did not posture, did not ask personal questions, did not mention money. He simply worked. On his 6th morning, when a delivery truck arrived late and the backup freezer unit failed, Ethan traced the issue to a worn relay and improvised a temporary fix that kept $30,000 worth of inventory from spoiling. Frank stared at the humming unit and then at Ethan. "Where'd you learn that?" Ethan shrugged. "Warehouses. A long time ago." Riley, standing nearby with a clipboard under one arm, narrowed her eyes. "So the drifter has a mysterious past. Great." But there was less contempt in it now and more curiosity than she wanted him to notice. Life at Maris House settled into a rhythm. Frank taught Ethan the dock. Maria fed him as if nourishment were an argument she intended to win. Riley sparred with him over everything from knife storage to inventory labels to whether he was trying too hard to be unreadable. He told them little. They asked less than most people would have, perhaps because working families know everyone carries a story and not all of them improve by being picked at. What Ethan learned in return was the shape of their struggle. Maris House had been built by Frank's father 50 years earlier as a tiny fry shack beside the pier. Over time it became a local institution, known for honest seafood, excellent chowder, and the kind of front porch hospitality tourists think is staged until they realize it isn't. But over the past 3 years a corporation called Atlantic Crown Hospitality had been buying property up and down the coast, rebranding fishing towns into curated experiences for wealthier visitors. Their local frontman, Victor Lang, owned a polished waterfront development firm that spoke in the language of revitalization while quietly pressuring small operators into impossible lease terms, supply manipulation, and predatory buyout offers. Maris House sat on a particularly desirable strip of waterfront connected to a service dock Atlantic Crown wanted for a luxury marina and dining complex. Frank had refused 3 offers already. Since then, local inspectors had become annoyingly frequent. A major supplier had abruptly doubled prices, and 2 independent captains who sold primarily to the Dawsons had mysteriously received better contracts elsewhere. "They want us tired enough to say yes," Riley said one evening as she and Ethan repaired a warped section of dock railing after close. The sunset had spread copper light over the water, and her face looked softer in it, less combative. "Dad thinks if we outwork them, they'll back off. I think men like Victor Lang only understand pressure." Ethan tightened a bolt and said, "You're probably right." Riley studied him. "You say that like you've met men like him." Ethan gave the smallest hint of a smile. "I've met every kind of man money creates." She leaned against the railing. "And what kind are you?" He looked out at the water before answering, still deciding. She laughed once at that, but gently. It was the first time her laughter had no blade in it. Attraction came quietly. Not because Riley became softer, but because Ethan began to understand what her sharpness protected. She ran the kitchen, negotiated with stubborn suppliers, tracked payroll, and still rose before dawn twice a week to help unload catch when crews came in shorthanded. She had left for Charleston years earlier, trained under a serious chef, and returned when Frank's second heart scare made it clear the family business could not survive on nostalgia and goodwill alone. Riley's dream had once been a restaurant of her own. Instead, she came home to hold together a place everyone else was trying to peel apart. Ethan admired her before he allowed himself to feel anything warmer than admiration. Riley, for her part, found herself noticing impossible details. The steadiness of his hands under pressure, the way he always stepped aside for older workers carrying weight, the fact that he never interrupted Maria, the controlled economy with which he spoke, as though every sentence had first passed through a private filter. One rainy night after close, the power flickered and the old generator failed to kick in. They worked by emergency light to secure perishables. Riley slipped on a wet patch near the back steps, and Ethan caught her before she hit the concrete. For one suspended second, she was in his arms, breathless, angry at herself for needing help, more angry at the rush of safety she felt there. "You can let go," she said, though not sharply. Ethan released her at once. "You okay?" "Yes." "A beat." "Thanks." Another beat. "You always this calm?" He looked toward the dark water and said, "No. I just learned the hard way that panic mostly helps the wrong people." She should have asked what that meant. She did not. Some stories reveal themselves better by earning trust than by interrogation. The trouble arrived in early December dressed in polished manners. Victor Lang came to Maris House in a camel overcoat and expensive loafers entirely unsuited to a working dock. He smiled as though he was there to discuss philanthropy. "Frank, Maria, Riley," he said, as if they were old friends. His gaze landed on Ethan with brief annoyance, the way men like Victor reacted to uninvited variables. "And you must be the new employee." Ethan gave nothing away. Victor took the best table unasked and laid out revised documents. He spoke of opportunity, tourism growth, seasonal cash flow stress, aging infrastructure, and how burdensome independent ownership could be in a changing market. He offered numbers that might have impressed someone desperate enough not to do the math. Riley did the math in her head before he finished speaking and laughed without humor. "You want our location for less than the value of the frontage alone." Victor steepled his fingers. "I'm offering relief from risk. There are health code reviews pending, marine access adjustments next quarter, not to mention fuel cost volatility. Sometimes the wise move is knowing when your chapter is over." Frank's jaw tightened. Maria said nothing, but Ethan saw the fear flicker in her eyes. Victor was not just predicting pressure. He was promising it. Riley stood. "Our answer is no." Victor smiled at her, as one might smile at a child being dramatic. "You have passion. I admire that. But passion doesn't refinance debt." Ethan, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Predatory pricing, selective supply interference, and coercive redevelopment don't usually look this tidy in person." Victor turned toward him slowly. "I'm sorry." Ethan met his gaze with polite indifference. "I said your strategy is more obvious than you think." The room went still. Victor's smile thinned. And you are. Dock labor, Ethan said. Then perhaps keep your insights limited to fish and rope. Riley should have stopped it there. Instead, she stepped closer to Victor and said, he's still more useful than you. Victor gathered his documents with deliberate calm. Stubborn businesses often romanticize their own martyrdom, he said. When you're ready to behave rationally, call me. He left with the serene confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted eventually. That same week, other things began to go wrong. A compressor line was tampered with. A state inspection arrived based on an anonymous complaint later proven baseless. A truckload of produce for the restaurant was misrouted and arrived half-spoiled. Then, on a Friday night after close, Riley went down to the side dock alone to secure a skiff before a squall rolled in. Ethan, finishing inventory inside, noticed voices where there should not have been any. He went out to find two men in windbreakers with Atlantic Crown subcontractor logos standing far too close to Riley while pretending to inspect utility access points. Their words were technically polite, but their body language carried the kind of menace that counts on plausible deniability. Riley had a flare gun in one hand and fury in both eyes. I asked you to leave, she said. One man gave her a smirk. Relax. We're just checking the easement. Ethan walked down the dock without hurry. That was the thing people often missed about truly dangerous composure. It does not need to rush. The easement doesn't include harassing the owner's daughter after dark, he said. You can leave now. The men turned. One recognized Ethan from Victor's meeting and gave a dismissive little laugh. This your security? Ethan did not answer the joke. Leave. Something in his expression, something measured, unbluffable, and entirely unwilling to be impressed, changed the equation. The men muttered, backed off, and returned to their vehicle with the performative irritation of cowards denied an easy target. Riley lowered the flare gun only after they drove away. Her breathing was fast, though whether from anger or adrenaline, she could not have said. Ethan asked, did they touch you? No. Did they threaten you directly? No. They wanted me to feel like they could. Ethan nodded once, filing away the distinction. Riley looked at him, really looked. You weren't scared, she said. I was focused, he replied. She gave a brittle laugh. Same difference to most people. He turned toward the restaurant. Most people waste time trying not to feel afraid. Better to decide what matters more. That night, Riley knocked on the prep room door above the ice machine where Ethan slept. She held 2 mugs of coffee and wore a sweatshirt over pajama shorts and stubbornness over vulnerability. Couldn't sleep, she said. Ethan opened the door and stepped aside. The room was spare, cot, duffel, folded clothes, a paperback, an old lamp, no photographs. Riley handed him a mug. You ever going to tell us who you really are? Ethan looked down at the coffee. Someone who needed to start over. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give tonight. She stood there a long moment. I used to think men who hide things are usually hiding weakness. And now? Riley exhaled. Now I think sometimes they're hiding damage. Silence settled. Not awkward, just honest. Finally, she said, for what it's worth, I was wrong about you. Ethan almost smiled. You were right that I wasn't built for this place. No, she said softly. I was wrong about that too. Their first kiss came a week later, not from dramatic confession, but from exhaustion, trust, and a rare moment when neither of them was trying to defend anything. A winter storm had hammered the shoreline all day, and by evening they were both soaked, cold, and running on too little sleep after helping secure boats and move supplies to higher storage. The power held by luck more than design. Maria had gone upstairs. Frank had finally listened to his doctor and gone to bed early. Riley and Ethan stood alone in the empty dining room, watching rain race across the windows. Riley said, this place is going to kill all of us before Victor gets the chance. Ethan said, not if I can help it. She looked over at him. That's the thing, Ethan. You say things like that as if help is something you can just decide to provide. He met her gaze. Maybe it is. Riley stepped closer, studying his face, as if this man had become the central puzzle of a season she had not meant to spend solving. I don't need rescuing, she said. I know. I don't need some mysterious guy to ride in and fix my life. I know that too. Then why are you looking at me like that? His answer was quiet enough that she had to lean in to hear it. Because needing and deserving aren't the same thing. She kissed him then, quick at first as if testing reality, and then more surely when he answered with the same restraint he brought to everything else. Not taking, not claiming, simply meeting her there. It would have been easy for Ethan to confuse the warmth he felt with relief after betrayal, but he was too honest with himself for that. What drew him to Riley was not refuge. It was recognition. She was not easy. She was not impressed by status she had not seen. She argued, challenged, noticed, and when she cared, she did so with her whole force. She made him feel not admired, but known in fragments, and somehow that was worth more. The past, however, was not done with him. Through Martinhale, Ethan handled the divorce with ruthless efficiency and almost surgical emotional distance. Vanessa's attorneys made the expected arguments. They tried to establish lifestyle expectations, implied commingling, hidden intent, and moral leverage. None of it landed. The prenup held. The business protections held. The asset movements were lawful, documented, and timed within rights she had never imagined he would exercise. By January, Vanessa's position had collapsed. Dylan, who had remained enthusiastic while he believed she was on the brink of securing a major settlement, evaporated once the numbers became real. He had debts. She had delusions. Neither was much use to the other. Martin relayed occasional updates without color, but one detail slipped through anyway. Vanessa had taken a job hostessing at an upscale bar outside Cambridge after burning through what savings she had personally controlled. Ethan felt no triumph in the image itself. What he felt was closure. She had wanted a game. She had discovered she had only ever understood the decorations around it. In the end, Ethan authorized one final offer, a modest lump sum settlement in exchange for immediate signature, total waiver of further claim, and strict non-disclosure regarding personal financial structures. Martin called it more generous than she deserves. Ethan called it the cost of finishing cleanly. Vanessa signed within 48 hours. There was no call, no apology, no plea. Just a name on paper and the official death of a life that, Ethan now understood, had ended the night he heard her laughing in the dark. Back in Breaker's Point, the Dawson situation reached a breaking point of its own. Victor Lang returned with lawyers, surveyors, and a fresh layer of polished menace. Atlantic Crown had arranged to acquire adjacent service access and was preparing a project that would unavoidably impact dock use, parking, and vendor routing for nearby businesses. It was economic strangulation disguised as development compliance. Frank sat at the office table with his reading glasses low on his nose, looking older than Ethan had yet seen him. Maria held a folder so tightly the edges bent. Riley paced like caged weather. They're going to bleed us until we can't buy bait, fuel, produce, or time, she said. Then they'll call it a fair sale. Ethan had known the day was coming. Quietly, over the prior month, he had resumed pieces of his old identity through secure channels. He reconnected with Martin, his private investment arm, and a mergers team that owed him loyalty deeper than salary. He requested due diligence on Atlantic Crown Hospitality, Victor Lang Development, and the parent financing structures behind the coastal acquisitions. What came back was ugly and useful. Atlantic Crown was over-leveraged, vulnerable to a refinancing event, and dependent on a private debt package maturing within the quarter. Victor Lang himself had personally guaranteed portions of a waterfront expansion based on projected occupancy numbers that had not materialized. Their strength was real, but brittle. They were a pressure machine held together by timing, ego, and the assumption that small people would collapse before big numbers did. Ethan recognized the type immediately. On the morning Victor scheduled what he clearly expected to be the final surrender meeting, rain clouds hung low over the marina, and the sea looked like hammered steel. Victor arrived with 2 attorneys and the smug patience of a man rehearsing victory. "Frank," he said as he entered the office, "I know this process has felt adversarial, but I'm here with a clean path forward. Sign today, and I can keep your family on as brand ambassadors during transition." Riley laughed out loud. "You want to buy our name after trying to bury it?" Victor smiled thinly. "I want to preserve what is sentimental value while modernizing what no longer works." Ethan stood near the window in a dark work jacket, hands in pockets, looking for all the world like a laborer who had wandered into a conversation above his station. Victor ignored him at first. Frank looked at the offer, then at Maria, then at Riley. Ethan could feel the weight in the room, the exhaustion, the fear, the temptation to choose any ending over endless siege. When Frank finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I need a minute." Victor spread his hands. Of course. But I would caution you against waiting much longer. Conditions change. Ethan turned from the window. They already have. Victor frowned slightly. Ethan took out his phone and placed a call. He did not dramatize it. He simply said, "Proceed." Then he ended the call and looked at Victor with the calm of a man opening a door he had built himself. Victor's own phone buzzed almost instantly. He glanced down, annoyed, then read the screen, and something very small but very satisfying happened around his eyes. Confidence cracked. One of his attorneys pulled out his own phone. Another stepped toward the window, as if different light might change the facts. Victor answered, "What do you mean the debt package was acquired?" His voice sharpened. "By who?" He listened. The color changed in his face. Riley looked from Victor to Ethan, understanding not the details, but the shift. Victor said, louder now, No, that's impossible. That position wasn't available." Ethan said, "Everything is available at the right price." Victor lowered the phone slowly. "Who are you?" It was the question Riley had asked in a dozen different ways without ever getting an answer. Ethan took a breath and, for the first time in Breakers Point, stood fully inside his own name. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said, "founder and principal equity holder of Cole Meridian Holdings." Frank blinked. Maria stared. Riley went perfectly still. Victor's expression tightened as recognition arrived a beat too late. Ethan continued, "Through a series of entities you never saw coming because you were too busy bullying families who actually work for a living, I purchased the distressed debt package underwriting Atlantic Crown's coastal redevelopment arm. This morning, after reviewing multiple covenant breaches and materially misleading projections, my team exercised the rights attached to that debt. Your parent structure is in forced reorganization. Your expansion credit is frozen. And the holding company you intended to use to choke this harbor now answers to a board I control." No one spoke. Even the rain seemed quieter. Ethan reached to the table, slid Victor's buyout papers back toward him, and said, "So let me save you some time. Mara's house is not for sale. Not to you. Not now. Not ever under pressure." Victor found his voice by force. "You can't just—" Ethan cut him off, not loudly, but completely. "I can. I did. And because I took the time to understand exactly how you've been operating, I've also instructed counsel to review vendor interference, harassment patterns, and municipal pressure applied to independent businesses here and in 2 neighboring towns. If your hope is that I'm bluffing, don't build your next move on it." Victor looked as if he wanted to rage, threaten, reassert dominance in some recognizable language, but power had already moved, and he knew it. Men like him were fluent only when the room believed in them. Without that, they shrank fast. He gathered his papers with stiff hands. "This isn't over." Ethan's face remained unreadable. "For you, it probably is." Victor left. His attorneys followed. The office door shut behind them, and the sound seemed to release the room from a spell. Frank sat down hard. Maria pressed both hands to her mouth. Riley stared at Ethan as if the past 6 months had just been picked up and turned over, revealing a hidden map beneath it. "Cole Meridian," she said at last. "I know that name." Ethan nodded. "You were never a drifter." "No, you were never broke." "No, you were hiding." "Yes." Riley laughed once, but there was hurt under it now. "That's a lot." Of yes for one day. Frank stood slowly. "Son," he said, and then stopped, perhaps because he was not sure what came next when the man you had trusted with your doc turned out to own enough money to change the fate of a corporation. Ethan spoke before the silence could harden. "Everything I did here was real," he said. "The work was real. The gratitude was real. What I feel for this family is real." He turned to Frank and Maria. "You gave me a place to stand when I had every reason not to trust anyone. I will never treat that lightly." Then he looked at Riley. "And what I feel for you has nothing to do with rescue, or debt, or gratitude. I didn't tell you the truth because I didn't know who I was supposed to be when I wasn't the man I had been before. That's not an excuse. It's only the truth." Riley's eyes shone, furious and wounded, and still somehow unable to stop seeing him. "Do you know how many times I asked?" "I do." "Do you know how insane you made me feel, trying to figure you out?" "Yes." "And now you just stand there and announce you can buy the people trying to destroy us?" Ethan took a step closer. "Not buy. Stop. With money." "Yes," he said. "With money. Because sometimes the cleanest way to protect good people is to make sure bad ones never get another lever." Frank, practical even through shock, said, "What happens now?" Ethan answered in the language of solutions because it was the most honest language he had. Now Atlantic Crown's local assets go into review. The parcels adjacent to your dock can be carved out or sold. The supply contracts they manipulated can be reset. The pressure campaign ends. Your debt gets refinanced on terms that let you breathe. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to invest directly in Maris House. Not to take it over, not to rebrand it, but to expand the dock operation, modernize the kitchen, secure the property permanently, and build the coastal test kitchen Riley deserves. Riley blinked. My what? Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since the reveal there was something softer in his face than command. The restaurant you should have had years ago. The one you would build if you weren't spending every ounce of yourself just keeping this place alive. Riley swallowed. You can't just decide my future for me. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm not deciding. I'm offering. The weeks that followed remade Breaker's Point almost as dramatically as Ethan's first arrival had remade his own life. Lawyers moved where threats used to. Surveyors returned, but this time at the Dawsons' invitation. Atlantic Crown's local operations were dismantled piece by piece. Victor Lang disappeared from town soon after, replaced in rumor by stories of investigations, investor lawsuits, and a house listed well below what he'd bragged it was worth. Ethan did not celebrate publicly. He funded quietly, hired strategically, and kept every promise with the same plain efficiency with which he had once mopped floors. The dock got repaired, then reinforced. New refrigeration units arrived. The accounting pressure eased. 2 independent captains who had been pushed away came back. Riley, true to form, fought Ethan on half his suggestions until he learned the proper way to present anything involving her future. Never as charity, always as partnership, and always with room for her to improve the idea until it became partly hers. In the process, the strain between them shifted from anger to something more difficult and more intimate. The work of trust after revelation. She did not forgive him in a single cinematic moment. She made him earn it. She asked ugly questions. She asked whether every gentle thing between them had been shaped by pity. He told her no. She asked whether he would have left if Victor had not pushed too far. He answered yes, if leaving meant keeping her safe from his unfinished past, and no, if leaving meant pretending she had become nothing to him. She hated that answer because it sounded like him. Careful, layered, honest enough to be infuriating. Yet little by little, she saw the deeper truth. The man who had hauled crates before sunrise was no less real because he owned buildings elsewhere. The man who had fixed freezers and taken orders from Frank and stood beside her in rain had not been acting. Wealth changed his reach, not his character. One evening in early spring, after the first warm day of the year had filled the porch with locals and tourists alike, Riley found Ethan alone at the end of the dock watching the tide turn. She walked up beside him, hands in the pockets of her jacket. Mom says you look less haunted lately, she said. Ethan smiled faintly. Your mother is observant. Riley nodded toward the water. You know what the worst part was? What? Not that you were rich. Not even that you hid it. It was that for a while I thought maybe I had imagined you. Like maybe the man who washed floors and drank bad coffee at 2 in the morning was just a costume. Ethan looked at her then, directly. That was the truest version of me I'd been in years. She studied him. Because you had nothing? Because for once no one wanted anything from me except effort. Riley's expression softened. I wanted more than effort. I know. And you still owe me for the lying. I do. A lot. Probably more than I can pay. She stepped closer. Good. I planned to collect for a long time. That was how they came back to each other. Not through perfect forgiveness, but through humor returning where hurt had lived. By summer, the renovated side building opened as Riley's test kitchen and private dining space, still unmistakably part of Maris House, but carrying more of her vision. Cleaner lines, better equipment, a menu built around local catch and family recipes sharpened by technique she had once thought she would never get to use. Food writers came, then travel magazines, then investors Ethan politely turned away because not everything needed to become bigger just because it could. Frank called it a miracle until Maria corrected him and called it work meeting timing. Ethan called it overdue. The final scene, if anyone else had written his life, would have been pure spectacle, press releases, gala dinners, headlines about a secret millionaire rescuing a coastal town. Ethan wanted none of that. The grand reveal that mattered happened on a quiet Sunday evening after close, when the porch lights glowed gold and the harbor breathed in slow silver under a full moon. Frank and Maria sat together at a corner table pretending not to know what was coming because parents have always understood more than they admit. Riley stood at the edge of the dock in a dark blue dress she had chosen specifically because it was beautiful without looking like she had tried too hard, which meant she had tried exactly the right amount. Ethan walked toward her. In a simple charcoal suit, no flash, no entourage, no public audience except the sea, the family who had saved him without meaning to, and the town that had watched enough to understand what mattered. He stopped in front of her, and for once the famously controlled Ethan Cole looked openly human, which is to say hopeful and a little afraid. "The first time I saw you," he said, "you looked at me like I was a problem your father had accidentally adopted." Riley laughed. "You were. Probably. The first time you trusted me, you tried very hard not to. The first time you kissed me, I realized I had spent too much of my life around polished things and not enough around true ones." Riley's eyes brightened. "That almost sounds like a line you rehearsed." "It was," he admitted. "I threw out the better version because it sounded too much like a man trying to win." She smiled softly. "And what are you trying to do?" Ethan drew a breath. "Tell the truth before I ask you something enormous." He reached into his jacket, but when he brought out the ring box, he did not open it immediately. Instead he said, "Vanessa once laughed because she thought I didn't know how to hurt people. She was wrong in more ways than one. I do know how. I just spent most of my life choosing not to. Then I met you and your family, and for the first time in a long time I wanted more than survival, more than control, more than winning. I wanted a life that felt like the porch behind us, the kitchen you built, your mother's coffee, your father pretending not to watch everyone he loves. I wanted mornings that smelled like salt and work and evenings where I knew exactly who I was standing beside. You gave me back a version of myself I thought betrayal had buried. You gave me the one thing money can't engineer, peace that doesn't feel empty. So I'm not asking you because I can give you security. You already know how to survive storms. I'm asking because every good thing in my life started the day your family opened the door, and every best thing in it started the day you stopped trying to hate me." Riley's laugh broke with tears. Ethan opened the box then, the ring. Catching porch light and moonlight together, elegant but not gaudy, chosen by a man who had finally learned the difference between value and spectacle. He went down on one knee on the weathered dock boards that had once held his whole new life in place. "Riley Dawson," he said, "will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that the truth I hid is nowhere near as important as the truth I want to live with you?" For a heartbeat, she said nothing, and Ethan thought absurdly of lemon tart boxes and rain on brownstone windows, and how strange it was that a man could lose one life and find another by driving far enough to hear the ocean. Then Riley covered her mouth, shook her head once as if overwhelmed by the size of what she felt, and said, "Yes. But I reserve the right to stay mad about the billionaire part whenever it's useful." Ethan laughed, the sound freer than it had been in years, and slipped the ring onto her finger as Frank wiped his eyes with all the subtlety of a man gutting fish, and Maria declared she had known all along, which was almost certainly untrue but deserved to be honored as family mythology. Riley pulled Ethan to his feet and kissed him under the harbor lights while the tide moved below them like something ancient approving. In the months that followed, no magazine story ever fully captured what had happened in Breakers Point, because the true ending was too grounded to fit the fantasy version. Ethan did not turn Maris House into a corporate destination. He protected it from becoming one. He created a local investment trust to support independent waterfront businesses so no other family would face Victor Lang's kind of pressure alone. He renovated the apartments above the restaurant into staff housing instead of luxury rentals. He put money into boats, refrigeration, apprenticeships, and a scholarship in Frank Dawson's father's name for culinary and marine trade students from working-class coastal towns. Riley expanded the restaurant on her terms, one a claim she pretended not to care about, and cared just enough to sharpen her knives with extra satisfaction. Frank started laughing more. Maria stopped pretending she wasn't the true executive power in the family. And somewhere back in Boston, Vanessa Cole, no, Vanessa Mercer for the brief, embarrassing months. Before that too dissolved, then simply Vanessa again, became one of those cautionary stories people tell carefully in private. The woman who mistook access for ownership, comfort for conquest, and a quiet husband for an easy victim, only to discover too late that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one who never needs to prove he is. Ethan never spoke of her with bitterness after that. The opposite of love is not hate. It is irrelevance. What remained important was the lesson her betrayal had carved into him. That some losses are not punishments but evacuations, a clearing out of rot before something better can be built. And so the man who had once stood in a dark hallway listening to his life be auctioned off by the woman he loved ended not broken, not hardened into cruelty, but remade, still quiet, still powerful, but now anchored to people who valued him for the things no balance sheet could hold. In the end, the greatest revenge was never the empty bank accounts, the failed scheme, the vanished lover, the signed divorce, or even the corporate takeover that sent a predator running. The greatest revenge was that Ethan Cole did not merely survive betrayal. He outgrew the world in which it had power over him. He found a dock at the edge of the sea, a family who fed him before they knew his worth, a woman who challenged him before she loved him, and a future rich enough that even a man who had once held millions in silence could finally admit he had been poor until then.